Good evening, everybody, and thank you very much for coming to this event. This is the schedule for tonight. If you can't see, then please come and sit close to the front. Yeah? The schedule is quite packed, and as you can see, we have a lot of small slots, and we must keep to the time in order to get there by the requisite end time of 8:30. My name is Dalim, and I'm the events director for ISACA London chapter. And this is, of course, an ISACA London chapter event. A lot of my colleagues from ISACA are here as well. And if possible, I'll introduce them to you at the end. But let's roll right now with the agenda. The first thing I want to tell you about is other events in London, ISACA related, in September. We had one yesterday, and that's the first one on the sheet here. Why it's there is because it featured a ISACA director called Kamal Khan. Kamal, would you just like to stand up? Talking about ethics and IT, and he was good. So, if that's a topic that's of interest to you or your organization, please come and see Kamal afterwards. Then, the next event this month is from our partner organization, BCS North London branch, and that's going to be next Wednesday. And as you can see there, it's at the bottom of the sheet if you can see it, Wednesday 12th of September. It's about green, and my sense of humor has forced me to call it Green Planet, and that is very much the theme. We have two groups who are keen to help with our environment, our ecology, the way we live and hope to live in the future. Those two are Greenpeace and also the IUCN. If you go to Kew Gardens, for example, you see on various plants and shrubs, this has been classified as highly endangered by IUCN. They're a body that monitors what's happening in our world today. We've got the CIOs of both those organizations coming to that event. We also have a number of other ISACA London chapter events in the pipeline. There is something on October 31st, which is actually going to be at Protivity, and that will be on the subject of assurance. The next one on November 26th will be at KPMG and will be on the subject of governance. The final one there, shown there, December the 12th, will be on the subject of cybersecurity. And so on. There's also one being scheduled right now at Grant Thornton in January, and that will be on the subject of security, non-cyber. So lots of good things coming up for you. But let's roll on with this evening. The other news and opportunities are a mixed bag, I must confess. You'll see what I mean in just one moment. The thing that I want to tell you about, and Lynn, perhaps you'd like to just come and join me in a moment, is that we have Sarah Orton, who is from She Leads Tech, and she will be doing a slot for us. But I'm very pleased to say that this event tonight is actually on the global ISACA map, because on screen there in the lower part you can see the narrative for this event on the She Leads Tech global website. So we've managed to achieve that, and I'm very pleased to welcome Sarah to tell us a bit more about that. The mixed news relates to this. We have a dear colleague called Rob Stroud, and something has happened to him, some rather sad news. Please let me introduce you to Lynn Lawton, past international president of ISACA, to tell us about it.
Thanks. Good evening, everyone. As Dalim said, I was past international president. I was president from 2007 to 2009. And at that point, it was my privilege to meet Rob Stroud and to work with him. He was introduced to me by Paul Williams, past president of the London chapter. And I remember Paul saying, Rob will be a good thing for ISACA. And he was very right. Rob was a driving force behind COBIT as we know it today. Rob has a huge network of contacts, which he was always willing to share and which he always used to evangelize for ISACA. So he would share in ways that you don't come across very often. There'd be a speaking opportunity that he could have taken, and he gave it to me because I was the international president and he wanted ISACA to be represented by the president. He shared his knowledge and his insights with many ISACA colleagues, and he was a frequent presenter at ISACA events. So if you look at the blog that is on the screen at the moment, there are comments from all over the world about how energetic and zestful Rob was, about his knowledge and his insight. And Rob was never afraid to try something new. He would dive in. He loved new things. He would dive in and make the most of it. But he'd go further than that. He'd look at, what can this do? How can it be used for good? How can it be used for bad? And what can ISACA do about it? So, for example, when Twitter was so new that half the board members were saying, what's a tweet? And the other half were saying, 140 characters never catch on. Rob was in there, trying it, using it at events, using it to publish events, and driving the rest of us to a point where we all understood social media was something ISACA had to get involved in or be left behind. So we owe him an enormous debt. He was very good for us. He was with us too short a time, but thank God he was with us at all. Rest in peace, Bob.
Thank you very much, Lynn. And just a brief moment of silence to just think about that sad loss. Now, you saw something about She Leads Tech, and you saw the global She Leads Tech website, and you know that this event is on there. But I've got somebody here who knows much more about She Leads Tech than almost anybody else here. It is Sarah Orton, who is the UK lead for She Leads Tech. And much more than that. Sarah, what else about She Leads Tech?
Thank you, Dalim. Okay, yes, I'm Sarah Orton. We just had the intro, and I'm going to talk to you very quickly about She Leads Tech, because Dalim's very kindly given me 10 minutes. So for those of you that won't be aware, I would guess the majority who are ISACA members would be aware that ISACA does have global reach, 215 chapters across 190 different countries globally. And as the lack of women in tech is a global problem, we'll come on to the problem in a little bit, and it affects industries globally, ISACA feels it has a responsibility to address that. And I'll come on to the detail of that. So why does gender diversity matter? There is a cyber security skills gap that you may well be aware of. UK PLC is adrift. A number of capable cybersecurity specialists, and by 2022 it's expected to be 1.8 million gap. And so part of addressing the gap is about bringing on more women and attracting women essentially in the first place, training those women and making sure that those women feel that they want to stay in tech. So that's quite a big ask. What's the problem? The problem is fundamentally about, and this is per a survey for Global Information Security Workforce Study in 2017, found that 51% of women have experienced discrimination. And of those 51%, 87 said that they'd experienced unconscious discrimination. 53% had unexplained denial or delay in career advancement. 29 experienced exaggerated highlighting of mistakes, errors or occurrences. 22% reported tokenism. By tokenism we mean sort of giving the impression, something that's done to give the impression of gender parity, rather than actually addressing that, in case you weren't aware what tokenism meant in that context. And 19% said they'd been overtly discriminated against. So there is, versus 15% of guys had said that they'd experienced discrimination. So that's part of it. We'll get onto some positive stuff in a minute, I promise. And as women go through their careers, so the survey says, discrimination goes up. And you know, you'll all have heard of the proverbial glass ceiling, and that in terms of this survey, that's what that this survey points to. So perhaps women aren't as aspirational as men. Perhaps that's true. I think not. Possibly it is more related to discrimination and bias. Perhaps women didn't see a path for themselves. Perhaps they didn't feel supported, appropriately mentored, and that there was a clear path for them within the organisations that they were working. So what are we going to do about it? So the ISACA She Leads Tech programme seeks to increase the representation of women in technology, leadership roles and the tech workforce generally. We're now in, I would say, the second year of those activities. So whilst we've been running some sort of events like this, incorporated as part of wider chapter meetings, and also some specific events. I know in London, Dalim's been doing some stuff with BCS, and that I've been involved in, but also in other areas of the UK, there's been specific She Leads Tech evening events. We are looking to do more in 2019, and that's part of the purpose of me being here today, just to sort of share with you some of that. So what's it about? It's about engaging, empowering and elevating women in tech. So that is our mission, and engaging is talking about, we have a number of women members of ISACA, but I don't see many of them here tonight. How do we attract women and make sure that they engage in these meetings? Do we need to do something specific for women that will mean that we'll get more of them out of from our own memberships? That's part of it, engendering engagement. And then we get to the sort of, more broader than that, how do we empower those women? How do we make them want to be leaders and see a role for themselves in the workplace as a leader? So that's setting up role models, whether they be female role models or whether they be male advocates for women in the workplace. And then also looking at the role of women, how do we elevate the role of women in technology so that it becomes the norm that women are seen as leaders in tech. So it's about raising awareness, preparing women to lead and building global alliances. That's part of the strategic plan and focus for how we're actually going to take this to market, if you like. So raising awareness, we're going to educate employees, allies and engaged professionals. So that's when I say that, I talk about people here in the room, our women members, and others, so that we can overcome some of the unconscious bias that's out there. It's not just about unconscious bias, there's other things besides, but that's one of the key things, and also an element, and some of the women in the room might relate to this, and some of the guys also, self-sabotage, those sorts of things that happen and are normal for human beings. Also, from a preparing to lead perspective, we're looking at developing training and skills programs to really support women into leadership roles. And then the third area is looking at building global alliances, strategic partnerships, currently looking at relationships with SANS and ISA for some of this stuff. But I guess, locally within Manchester, I've been working with NCC Group, National Computer Centre, and I know obviously, Dalim, you do stuff with BCS in London and other bodies. So it really is about, ISACA it's not looking to go it alone on this. You know, if we're honest, we're probably late to the game on some of this. And it really is about sort of leveraging those alliances that we do have to get, you know, a sort of more, you know, synergy and sort of power around what we achieve in this important agenda. Okay, well, that's a funny looking slide. She said in her Mancunian accent. Okay, so what can you do? How can you get involved around those three strategic levers? So it's about chapter programming. So you'll see already this is an example of chapter programming and, you know, having an awareness session on She Leads Tech. There's looking at a male advocacy program. There've been some ideas about having some pins that the males in the audience can put on their lapels to show that they support She Leads Tech. I haven't actually seen those in action yet, and you know, you can be the judge and work out whether you would be interested in wearing one of those. But I think male advocates is an important part of the programme and supporting, you know, more women into tech and making it feel a bit more sort of friendly and welcoming. Can someone take that off the screen, please? Also, networking events. We're looking at running networking events. I think that becomes part and parcel of these sorts of things. But it's making sure that we don't rush these events and that there actually is space.
I'm just going to try and fix this.
Thank you, Jeremy. That there is actually space in these events for people to network, because I think, I definitely think as a woman, it's important to feel engagement. I need to speak to people and I need to engage, and networking is an important part of that. Preparing to lead, half-day workshops, you can see there. I was involved in delivery of a webinar on diversity inclusion earlier this year. That's still available on the ISACA website if you want to listen to myself and a couple of other colleagues from the Global Women's Leadership Council talking about our own experiences. And also it's about speaking opportunities like this for women, making sure that we have more women presenting at ISACA events. So we have a target around ensuring each event does have at least one woman speaker. I think we've exceeded that target tonight, Dalim. Well done. And then in terms of building global alliances, I've talked already about strategic partnerships with SANS, ISA, NCC Group, BCS, to mention but a few. And we are exploring the idea of advocacy days. In 2019, we are looking to have our first international She Leads Tech conference, hopefully in Europe, hopefully in Frankfurt. That's what was discussed last month in San Francisco. So watch this space. It could change in terms of venue, but it's definitely something that we're looking to do, and that will be open to all who are interested in. And we need to make sure that the branding is right and focuses so that it isn't perceived to be a women-only event, because that's not what it's about. Okay, so that there's some ideas around how you could engage. I don't propose to go through all of those, but there's some ideas. We'll share the slide. How am I doing for time? And okay, and then in terms of ISACA practicing what it preaches, because it's all very well to talk about these things, but how are we actually going about doing this? It's been identified as a designated role for all chapter boards globally. So I'm the She Leads Tech lead for my chapter in Northern England, and essentially across the UK and Ireland, all chapter boards now have a female rep for She Leads Tech. We have a WhatsApp group, and we have a team that operates nationally. There's also a European group for that. So we've got female representation across all chapter boards in UK and Ireland. More work to do to get those women into leadership positions. I just so happen to be Vice President of Northern England currently. I think that's an idea that the guys on the board have to get me into the leadership position. I'll decide whether I do that or not. And there's some other examples there. I know Dali wants me to wrap up. There's some other examples there of activities that we've had in the last 18 months around She Leads Tech. But any women, any men in the audience that would be interested in getting involved, please get in touch. Thank you.
Good. Super. Thank you very much. Okay. Well, I would like Amanda to come up if she's here. Can't see her. Oh, there's Amanda. Right. What are you doing right at the back of the room? Do come up and let's switch over to the next part. That was about She Leads Tech. And just an aside on that, as you may have noticed, I'm not female, but I am very keen on advocating women in technology and She Leads Tech. So during this month of September, I'll be speaking in ISACA Milan and then in ISACA Sofia to advocate women in technology and She Leads Tech. Let's spread the message, and all of you, please help. Yeah, please encourage more women in technology, and let's spread that encouragement immediately, because we now have 3 people from PWC to talk about emerging technology. The first is Amanda Dickens to talk about disruptive technologies. I know you've seen quite a lot of that on screen or off screen already this evening, but now we'll switch to the official version. Then we'll have Jeremy Dalton to talk about VR and AR. Is Jeremy going to be here in virtual mode or no? No.
I'm real.
We have the real Jeremy Dalton, that's great. And then we'll have Joanne Murray, who I did see here. She's over there to talk about drones. Will you be flying over later, Joanne? That's tremendous. Okay, so please join me in welcoming Amanda, Jeremy, and Joanne.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to PWC. I'm going to show a very short video to kick things off.
Does your business have a future? Waves of disruption are reshaping society. New technology is triggering different ways to live, learn, and work. Some will adapt and thrive. Some will be swept aside. Do your biggest competitors even exist? Yesterday's crazy idea could be tomorrow's billion-dollar startup. So, can you imagine what your customers will need before they know it themselves? Do you have the courage for real change? The biggest opportunities could be outside your comfort zone. Which new markets should you move into? Can you move fast enough to exploit them? With exponential technology colliding with climate change, social unrest, and rapid urbanization, can you prepare for the unknown? Emerging markets are set to become the world's largest economies. Are you positioned to be part of this shift? With everything we know about employment changing, have you considered the implications? Disruption can offer huge rewards for those who embrace it. At PWC, we balance business understanding with technology innovation and human insight. We are harnessing the power of intelligent digital. We will ask tough questions. Are you monitoring the disruption that's heading your way? Is your official future fact or fiction? Will you transform risk into opportunity? Are you looking disruption in the eye? Your future is now.
So you might be sitting there wondering, why does PwC have a disruption team? Well, about 18 months ago, one of our very large clients came to us and said, PwC, we don't want to be the next Blockbusters. They didn't see Netflix coming, so can you come in? Can you scare the living daylights out of us? Can you show us all of the emerging technologies and megatrends that are coming for our business model? But then can you reassure us that everything will be okay? And of course we said yes, we definitely can. So we have built a methodology and several exercises to help clients look at both the risks and the opportunities that emerging technologies bring. And one of the first things that we like to do is to fully immerse them in this technology. So we built, Jerry, myself and Louise, a virtual reality experience. And Louise over there is in the experience. We're going to give you a demonstration of it. And in it, you're going to a job interview sometime in the future, and you've got to spot 20 different disruptors. And as Louise goes along, I will give you some narrative on a few of those disruptors, but I'd really like you to, as you're watching it, think about the sort of security and controls that you're going to have to put around some of this emerging tech in the future. Let's go.
Hello, I'm Amy, a benevolent AI system created by PWC to translate real-world predictions about the future into a virtual reality experience. No one knows the future, but I am here to guide you through a vision of where we could be headed. You're on your way to a job interview as a futurologist. On your journey, you will be immersed in a range of potential disruptions to test your skills for the job. Which of these disruptions are credible, and which are just hype? What are the real game changers, and how soon might they hit? Let's get to work. Miss Kurtz, your interviewer, will be analyzing your progress in real time. Please pick up the augmented reality glasses on your right-hand side. Great. Now please look at the screen panel in front of you. This will allow me to connect to your AR device. There. So your job is easy. If you spot a possible disruptor, just gaze at it and press the button on top of your controller. Later on, you can rate its impact on your business. For example, with my user-friendly blend of both AI and augmented reality, am I a potential disruptor to your business? Press the button now if you think I could be. There, you've got it.
Right, Louise has just stepped out of her autonomous vehicle.
Welcome to Core City. Population 4 million inside the city wall, and an estimated 25 to 30 million in the core economic region beyond. Trucks, cars, buses, they're all driverless. No accidents, no parking tickets, no emissions. It's bliss.
So there are 53 cities around the world that are testing or thinking about testing autonomous vehicles at the moment. London is definitely one of them. And there was news today that Waymo has recently surpassed 9 million driving hours in autonomous vehicles. There's still a lot of debate about when autonomous vehicles will mature. Some people say it could be 3 years and they'll be here. Others say 10 to 20. We've just got to keep an eye on that one. Let's move on, Louise.
With our 24/7 autonomous police force, we have seen a dramatic fall in crime.
So Dubai has already rolled out its first wave of robot police. It patrols the city's malls and all of the tourist attractions. You can tap its chest and it will give you some information. You can pay fines or report crimes. And you may notice a little robot, a mini drone that scanned Louise to make sure that she was allowed into Core City.
3D printed buildings, a fraction of the cost and time.
May seem a little out there to be building a skyscraper from a 3D printer, but actually academics in France have just built a 3D printer that can print 1,000 square foot, 5-bedroomed house in just over 2 weeks. So it's not too much of a leap of imagination to think that skyscraper will be next.
All electric, powered by quantum batteries.
Okay, this one's a little bit out there. So this is a little bit of a leap from quantum computing to quantum speed up of batteries. Friends at Microsoft has said big announcement within the year on quantum computing, and within 5 years it will be here. Quantum batteries, not so sure about yet.
Your biometric readings indicate that you are 8% dehydrated. You may want to purchase a beverage. Luddites. There are new jobs being created every day. Life purpose coaches, avatar fashion design, and asteroid harvesting.
So I think, like most consultancies, we've all done some research on automation of jobs, and a couple of weeks ago we concluded that actually we'd be creating more jobs than losing them. But you could imagine if jobs are lost quite quickly that it might cause unrest in the future.
Your devices are now all being wirelessly charged for free in exchange for your open access T3 data. Your Tier 2 data is automatically shared with the government and your health insurance provider. Cheaper insurance, better healthcare, everyone's a winner. Remember Arabica coffee? I would die for some. Never thought climate change would hit so hard. So, are you feeling rich enough for the real coffee, or do you fancy some synthetic? How would you like to pay? Core coin, data, or rupees?
So what we're saying here is that in the future we could imagine something like Bitcoin as being one of the currencies. Maybe the dollar is not dominant anymore, we've just chosen rupees here. The most interesting one here is payment by data. And last year a startup on Old Street in Shoreditch did an experiment where they were selling t-shirts in exchange for the last 3 photographs on your mobile phone. And the number of people that just gave their last 3 photographs in return for a t-shirt was unbelievable. So it's quite an interesting one there.
The synthetic coffee is clean at least. They use blockchain-based tracing of the supply chain to verify there are no bioterror compounds in it.
So blockchain-based supply chains, definitely more transparent, builds trust with consumers as they know what they're getting, and can track the origin of supply. We released some research last week that said 4 in 5 global executives have a blockchain initiative underway at the moment. So Dubai is already testing passenger drones and have completed some successful flights already, and Singapore is already investing heavily in them too. There's EHang, Uber, Volocopter, all companies building these drones. They'll obviously have a huge impact on how we travel, ourselves and goods over short distances, as long as we are willing to get in one of those things. Not so sure.
Never been a better time to be old. And even if you can't afford a neural upgrade, there's dementia-friendly work out there.
So this is about advances in synthetic biology and genetic editing, enabling us all to live a lot longer. So a 10-year-old today could live to 150 years of age on average, and we've been working with quite a few pension funds who are rightly very concerned about this impact of longevity.
Error is priceless, made by humans. What a luxury.
This is actually my favourite disruptor. You can imagine in the future if everything is made by robots, 100% perfect, that actually the luxury items will be flawed and made by humans. Who knows?
Basic income, universal, as long as you're inside the wall.
Yeah, UBI is related to the last one on automation actually. If machines are generating all of the wealth, how do we redistribute it to society? And you'll notice that the UBI was for everybody inside the core city walls. So I'll leave it to your imagination as to what it feels like on the outside. I imagine something like Mad Max.
See the hydroponic tomatoes growing on that vertical farm, with the genes of real Italian tomatoes.
So there are already lots of companies who, implement vertical farming, but I've not seen anything on a skyscraper yet. But you can imagine that pollution is a thing of the past in this city. If all of the autonomous vehicles are electric, no more pollution, you can grow something down the side of the skyscraper. Louisa's going to cross the road. You can tell everything has just stopped so she can move.
With a synthetic biology revolution, you can design the baby of your dreams.
This again related to longevity, but could we use CRISPR or gene editing to create a designer baby? A lot of ethical questions around that, but you do wonder if it's happening already somewhere.
Another maintenance nanobot gone rogue. Don't mind it though. We've got our own anti-hack software with predictive analytics totally foolproof. Okay, glitch. I'm going to power down your visual overlay while I fix the problem. Wow, I guess this is what the world looked like before AR brought it to life. Bleak, no? I know a digital real estate advisor who can get you a great deal on some space. I'm just going to power up the glasses once again.
So you can see there Louise got hacked. She got far too close to a car and the little bot was trying to hack it, and she got hacked as well. So we still expect cybersecurity to be a huge issue in the future. There's far more things to be able to hack.
Please present your arm to the scanner so it can analyze your biometrics from your implantable and check you in.
So chipping employees is quite popular in Sweden. Put it in between this finger here, and all it does is allows you to get into a building, open your laptop, pay for things in vending machines or in the canteen. But last year, a Wisconsin company in the USA held a chip party, and it asked all of its 250 employees whether they'd want a chip in their fingers. And over 80 of them said yes, that they would. So I wonder when PWC is going to chip me.
Welcome to our headquarters. I'm Amanda Kurtz. Thank you for the work you've done so far. Can you rate the disruptors that you've identified? I want to see your take on the future. Amy will guide you through the process.
Thank you, Ms. Kurtz. Congratulations. You have identified the major disruptors, but what we really want to know is how you rate them. Can you sort the signal from the noise? Please click the button on your controller.
So we're going to stop it there, and what we'd normally do is ask everybody to rate them on their business, but too many of you in the room to do that. But that last one, holographic technology, it already exists, and actually Jeremy mentioned that 2,500 of us did some training recently, and our chairman appeared as a hologram. So that's it for the... So pleased it works. Thank you.
My name's Joanne Murray, so I also work in the emerging technology team here at PwC with Amanda and Jeremy, but I sit specifically within our drones team. We've been set up to help our clients harness the power of drone captured data. We see a lot of our clients are using it already, but often at project level, so we thought, how can we help them actually use that systematically and strategically across their business? So one of the first things we did when we were established in January was to commission some economic research. We were very keen to try and differentiate between the hype and the news stories you hear around drones, and to understand what the economic reality was. So after a few months with our economists, we released our study, and it had some pretty surprising numbers in there. So by 2030, we predict that the increase in GDP could be up to 42 billion through drones. And that's the drone economy. So that isn't just the hardware, that's the software that goes with it and all the add-on benefits of using drones. Up to 76,000 drones could be flying in our sky in the UK, and up to 628,000 jobs. We're very aware that this is a size of the prize, if you like. There's a lot that needs to happen if these economic benefits are going to be realised, and that's what we're going to talk about today, some of the opportunities and also some of the challenges. So first of all, we'll maybe do a quick 30-second stop to make sure we're all on the same page with what we mean by drones. So when PwC are looking at drones, we're talking about the devices that fly in the air, from ground up to manned aviation airspace. So below the aeroplanes that you fly and go on holiday into, to the ground. So we've got two devices here, one of which is a fixed wing drone, the one at the top. It looks like an aeroplane, and that is best used for surveying and mapping. So it's like a glider principle. So it can glide for quite a long time. It's very lightweight and quite indestructible. So you could give that a kick and it'll be fine. So yes, survey and mapping if you want to map a large area or do a survey of a construction site. The one underneath that might be the image you're more familiar with, maybe if you've got family members or children who have drones, and that is a multi-rotor drone, and that's very good for inspecting. So you can see the camera on the bottom there, that's great for inspecting your assets. So that's basically what we're talking about. But I often think that the drone, when we're thinking about commercial use, it's often a red herring, because the real value of these devices is the data that it captures. So it's the sensors and the payloads that these drones carry to capture the data that can really make a difference for business. So you're probably familiar with lots of news stories with drones, the good, the bad and the ugly in the press. There's a lot of talk of Uber's air taxi, so they are claiming to have a developed product in the airspace by 2023, that Uber will have a drone as a flying taxi. Everyone will have heard of last mile delivery, of getting your Amazon parcel delivered by a drone, and obviously getting your pizza delivered. There's also lots of negative press around drones as well, drones used for spy and the issues around privacy, the issues around security and safety. But I think our research and the press around this shows that drones aren't really an if, but a when. There's significant investment from real big players in the aviation industry, from Boeing, from Airbus, from Matanet, invested in this technology for the future. So here at PWC, we're aware of that and what the future direction looks like, and that's why we're investing in this. We mustn't forget the drones for good stories as well. So you maybe have heard of the drones used for delivery in developing countries. So Malawi have developed their own drone corridor with UNICEF, the charity, where they can deliver medical goods, vaccinations, blood samples a lot quicker than if they had to use the roads where the infrastructure is poor. Similar in Tanzania, they've got delivery systems there. A story I like in Malawi as well is they're not just using drones for delivery, they're using drones to scan large areas and townships, so using the fixed-wing drone. And through that rich data they can get there, they can really quickly assess the poverty levels in those areas through issues such as the level of tin roofs versus thatched roofs, the levels of latrines versus people who don't have access to a toilet. Those are the indicators that would allow them to target cholera much easier, because they know where the poorer areas that they need to get vaccinations and interventions in there. So I always like to remind people that drones can be used for good as well. But we're most interested in benefits for business here in the UK. So why are people using drones and where are they using them? So on the screen there we've got 5 example use cases. So I've talked about survey and mapping. If you have, for example, a large construction site, or you might be building a road or upgrading a motorway network, traditionally you'll have guys on the ground, boots on the ground, going out and manually surveying those areas. With a drone you can do that much quicker, faster, safer, cheaper, and generally with improved quality of data. It's also less disruptive. You don't need to close roads for this. You don't need to disrupt traffic or have lots of planning in place. They're also useful for program management. If you think of managing your supply chain on that large complex construction site, we often use the example of HS2. Very complex program, very lengthy, very costly, with multiple contractors on there. If HS2 or a similar client chose to map the progress every 2 weeks using a drone, they'd be able to compare that with the BIM diagrams they have and the as planned versus the as is, and they get a real grip on what's going on below much quicker, much cheaper, and then it has a single source of truth that can't be disputed. Asset management and maintenance. The common example here is oil rigs. Very costly to close down a rig for one day to go out and manually inspect that. The health and safety issues around that as well. It's very costly to get the guys on the ropes up there and planning that. If you can send a drone out there to do a scan of the rig, they can get an accurate 3D digital twin of that rig to maybe 1 centimetre of accuracy or 2 centimetres. Again, that's a lot quicker. That allows the managers to make much quicker business decisions. How quickly do they need to get someone out there to fix it? Public safety and emergency response. So a lot of fire services in the UK are already using drones. So some of them have them on their vehicles already. They can send the drone out early to assess the level of damage. Therefore, they can respond with the right equipment, the right number of staff, etc. There was also the first. It was a pilot, an exploratory pilot, but a delivery across the Thames between St Guy's Hospital and St Thomas's Hospital of blood results, which were normally using the congested traffic in London. That would take a fair few hours, so they had a small drone corridor going across there. There's also interesting use cases around delivery and how we can assess danger much more quickly, for example, in large events, football matches, that kind of thing. And then there's environmental monitoring. So you can get sensors on drones that can assess crop health or levels of disease or indicators of flood risk, fire risk, that kind of thing. So the UK government is very interested, particularly in the light of Brexit, and how we reform our agricultural policies of how we can deploy drone data there as well. So they're just 5 of the areas that we're interested in here at PwC. The use cases are, there are more, but they go slightly more niche. But essentially those 5 down the right-hand side, that's basically the litmus test. Will using a drone give you data that is one of those 5, and that's when we start looking for investment. However, this isn't going to happen tomorrow. So for the economic benefits that we talked about earlier, the 42 billion, huge number, we need a convergence of technology, societal acceptance and regulation. So the Civil Aviation is the regulator of the airspace, and for those guys to permit the use of drones, the 76,000 drones that we say could be in our sky, they need absolute confidence in the technology. One of the key steps we need here is an unmanned traffic system. Okay, if you've got devices flying in the sky without any human input, they need to be able to detect and avoid each other. That's quite complex technology. You need low latency connectivity, 5G, so there's a whole range of things that need to come together. Particularly important as well is societal acceptance. Who here wants drones flying around their houses, their children's playgrounds, that kind of thing? There was a lot of press this summer about people's holidays being ruined because people are taking their drones to the beach every day. And the noise, they make quite a bit of noise. The privacy element, it's quite disruptive. So I think there's a long way to go before we can convince the public of the good use of drones. And then there's the regulation. How do you regulate this? You know, any one of us can go out and buy a drone tomorrow. Some recent legislation that was passed in July now requires anybody who owns a drone over 250 grams to register it with the Civil Aviation Authority. So I think that's a step in the right direction of how we regulate this and how we give accountability to drone users. But there's a long way to go. So that's what we're particularly interested in. We're working quite closely with government and the regulator to understand the direction of travel. We've got a forward-leaning UK government. They're investing heavily into the technology and the infrastructure that needs to go around this. But there is a long way to go. So I think we're quite clear that there are significant benefits for the public and for business in using drones. So the increased productivity. If you think, for example, an engineer currently has to go, if they're inspecting an asset, they may have to go up and have lengthy journeys to get to a remote location. Here we can send a drone much quicker. The engineer can have the data at their fingertips in real time. Huge productivity gains. Improved health and safety. If we use mining as an example, if you can send a drone into a mine rather than having people clamber down there, particularly in developing countries where health and safety isn't necessarily paramount, we think there's real opportunity there as well. When you integrate it with other technologies, for instance, artificial intelligence, the example I used earlier in Malawi of the detecting cholera outbreaks, they're integrating artificial intelligence with the drone surveys there so that the data that comes out is already predicting where they need to go and intervene as quickly as possible. Long-term environmental impacts, because there's less machinery required, less plant. There's a driver for public-private partnerships as well, we feel, because there's lots of tech startups and SMEs in this space that really could really benefit from some collaboration and co-investment here. And generally the ability to make decisions more quickly is an opportunity for all businesses, as well as the public benefits we talked about. They're a real asset for the police force, for looking for missing people, for monitoring dangerous areas, for reacting to road accidents very quickly, for example. However, as with everything, there are challenges. We've touched on some of them earlier. The key for this to be effective is the need for controls and governance. So all of these businesses who are thinking about using drones should have a strong governance framework in place, and that's what we specialise in here at PwC within our assurance practice. The next challenge is the regulatory environment, which I touched on before. So currently you can't fly your drone beyond the visual line of sight which means if you can't see it, you shouldn't be flying it. So it needs to be in the radius of yourself. You also shouldn't be higher than 400 feet. Thinking of the commercial benefits we talked about earlier, the regulatory environment is a real restriction here. You know, if you can't fly it out to the oil rig, if you can't go and map all of your fields in one go and you've got to keep landing it. So we've got a long way to go to move the regulatory environment along. The fear and lack of trust in the technology, so that goes back to the societal acceptance piece. How do we get the public along this journey with us? How do we convince them of the benefits and convince them that it's going to be safe and their privacy isn't going to be affected? We also need the correct ecosystem in place to convert the data into meaningful benefits. So you've got your drone capturing all this interesting data, but if it's landed on your desk in mounds and mounds, if you're not utilising it properly, it's almost useless. So you need the systems in place and the software so you can interpret that and make decisions quickly. The rate of integration with machine learning, it's much slower than we'd expect as well. The increased usage, the more drones in the sky, the higher the risk. Information and data security. If somebody captures your drone, they've got your data. How are you securing it from capture right through to processing? So you need controls in place there as well. Public acceptance, which we've touched on. Connectivity challenges. We're a while away from 5G here in the UK. So that's when the real benefits will come, when we've got that confidence in the connectivity. And also the ethical use. Drones being used for bad. You're probably all aware of the Venezuelan president example. That's just one example that made it to the press. So there's lots of concerns around that, but there's also lots of investment in how we detect drones, how we prevent that misuse of drones. So I think in summary, we're confident of the opportunities for business, but without the governance and controls in place and the ability to monitor them and the ability to make sure you're capturing your data safely, accurately, securely, and you're managing it effectively, the benefits will not be realised and it could pose a risk to your business. Thank you very much. We'll be having a panel session, I think, afterwards, where we can take any questions that you might have.
My name is Jeremy Dalton. I lead the virtual reality and augmented reality team for PWC UK. So I'm here today to talk to you about virtual reality and augmented reality, two technologies which I find particularly exciting, and hopefully by the end of this you'll find somewhat exciting too. So firstly, the difference between the two. On one side we have virtual reality. This is all about being immersed in a completely virtual environment, a different environment from the one we're in right now. Then we have augmented reality. Augmented reality is where you're still in the real world, but that real world is being contextualized and filled with a digital overlay of information. That can be digital objects, that can be digital navigation signals, that can be a digital vehicle in front of you that you can look at from different angles. But we'll go on to a few use cases in a bit. So a little bit about the history of VR. This is not a new technology, and in fact, the ideas behind it are so old, you could arguably create a case that it goes back to the 1800s. What you're seeing here is a picture of the Rotunda in Leicester Square here in London. Now, the whole point of this was to be able to immerse people in a different environment. The very same objective that we have nowadays in virtual reality, except instead of painting pictures in real life locations to make people believe they're in another location, we're using digital technology involving headsets. One is more reliable than the other. Jumping through to the 1960s, you had people like Morton Heilig invent a mechanical device called the Sensorama. You'd shove your head inside this thing and it would give you somewhat of an immersive experience. It even had little scents of roses that it would push at you when you were cycling through a field of flowers. On the right-hand side, we have an academic from MIT, Evan Sutherland, who arguably created the world's first digital AR headset. And this was called the Sword of Damocles, from the way it hung ominously above the head. Did anyone try virtual reality in the late 80s, early 90s? Yeah, there's a few sick faces in the crowd. It was a particularly miserable time for the industry because you had these really bulky machines. They cost a lot of money. And if anyone played video games at the time, after paying all that money and putting on these headsets that weighed multiple kilograms, you got a fairly miserable experience. You got graphics of the late 80s, early 90s, and they ran at such a slow frame rate that they often made you sick. Jump through to 2012. Palmer Luckey puts the Oculus Rift on Kickstarter. This was his garage prototype project that he thought it was time to resurrect and bring to the masses. He asked for $250,000 to bring this to life, and we gave him $2.4 million. 2 years later, Facebook takes note, buys Oculus for $3 billion. And now we have 8 out of the top 10 technology companies in the world that are involved and invested in either virtual reality, augmented reality, or both technologies, including, most interestingly, Apple, a company that is not famous for being a first mover, but in fact for being a second mover, for watching what is going on in the world, and then, once they've decided it is suitable to bring to the market and will actually have a market there, that's when they bring it in. And they have invested in both VR and AR. Now, to talk to you a bit about how this is being viewed in different industries, we ran a survey, the Digital IQ survey, and this was done globally with over 2,200 business and IT leaders around the world. And we asked them a number of questions. These two I've taken out from the survey to show to you. On this side, what level of investment are you making nowadays in virtual reality? On the other side, what level of investment are you making in augmented reality? The industries are down the middle there. The top coloured bar is today's investment. The bottom coloured bar is in 3 years' time. The big note here, in summary, this whole chart is saying that regardless of what sector you're in, whether it's public sector, hospitality, automotive, healthcare, whatever investment you're making now in virtual reality and augmented reality, they intend to increase that in 3 years' time. So we should expect to see this technology become much more prominent across every single industry. For anyone who likes statistics and data, here are a few numbers for you. Not that the actual numbers really matter, but $215 billion by 2021. That is IDC's view for the market of VR/AR. 85% enterprise driven. For those of you who think it's all about Pokemon Go and video games, no, in fact, 85% of the revenue from this technology will come from businesses. And then finally, our own statistic here, we expect over 250 million VR headsets to be used by 2021. So how does this technology actually get used in industry? To understand the risks, it's important to understand where we're using it right now and where it can be used in the future. These are the 5 key areas that apply across all industries. Training, obviously a very big one. Instead of having to deal with logistics of traveling to a training site, you consider the idea of an oil refinery engineer that needs to travel to the oil refinery. The oil refinery needs to be partly shut down, maybe to do some more complex procedures. All of that can be mitigated by building that entire refinery in virtual reality. And in fact, that's what we've done, and we're going to run a demonstration tomorrow, which is going to be quite interesting. It's going to bring together multiple people from different parts of the country into a virtual oil refinery, where we can all talk to each other and run training scenarios in that environment. Design. This is all to do with no longer needing to produce physical prototypes anymore. So instead of, let's take the automotive industry, for example. There's a lot of clay modeling that gets done to build an idea of what these super vehicles might look like in the future. Instead of building an actual physical model, again, everything can be done in the virtual world, where you can have stakeholders from the ergonomics teams, the health and safety teams, the mechanical engineering and electrical engineering teams, all come together in the virtual space and examine that vehicle, and therefore increase, or decrease rather, the feedback time to producing the next version of the prototype. Smart information. This is all to do with contextualizing the real world, explaining it providing information about complex bits of machinery or complex operations and making that easier. Telepresence, this is all to do with actually no longer needing to be anywhere physical, but instead being able to be there virtually. And the reason you might do that is due to time constraints, financial constraints, even health constraints, where it's too dangerous to operate as a human being in that environment. Entertainment and marketing is fairly self-explanatory. So, real life example for you, company that has invested quite a bit of money into it. American Airlines. I first heard about their use of virtual reality a few months ago at the IATA conference. They are using it to train cabin crew. So instead of having to take cabin crew to a physical airplane, and you can imagine how many different models of airplanes there are in the world, making sure that they have access to them, and they're trying to run hundreds of cabin crew through these experiences, and it's not scalable because you can't have 100 people access the same plane at once. You can build all of the interiors of all the airplanes in virtual reality, and they can be accessed by anyone, anywhere, as long as the software and the hardware is available. One of the key stats and benefits that I took from this presentation, and there are many, is that American Airlines saved over 1,300 hours of simulator time as a result of implementing such a scenario.
What we've managed to achieve at Vector Suite is you've got 2D happening at the same time as 3D. We can pop back and forth within the application to 2D to make us.
This is McLaren working with a British virtual reality company called Vector Suite. Now this goes back to the design application I was talking about, using the space around us to design vehicles in virtual reality. This is an example of how that would run. And finally, this is a fairly new example from 2 days ago. Well, it was new to me, when I visited a town called Norrköping in Sweden. They have a visualization center. They worked with NASA on this. I think they were given $6 million in funding to produce this data visualization system, which uses a projection-based form of virtual reality. So everybody there is wearing a form of 3D glasses, and they're projecting the universe effectively, or the known universe, onto the walls in front of them, the dome in front of all the audience. Now, that's interesting because it's very immersive, but it's also interesting because this is not a pre-recorded session. This is not just a static piece of software. What is happening is that the entire universe is being built on current known data in real time. So the curator or facilitator of that experience can decide, and he did, let's go to Mars. Took us all to Mars, and all of a sudden you could see, if anyone's seen Google Maps build up as it's loading data from the server, it was like that, but on Mars. All the surfaces were being built, the terrain, the hills were all starting to come alive, and that was based off real-time data. Now, it's an incredible amount of information that's being pulled in, and they're using virtual reality to visualize that and analyze that, and effectively communicate different plans for the audience as well as for higher operations. And at PWC, we've also used the technology to immerse our own people in different environments to help them understand different mindsets. And we ran this event a month ago or so with 2,800 people who were in a virtual reality headset. So the final thing I'll mention is that virtual reality and augmented reality are two separate but related technologies. Those two form part of what we call the 8 essential emerging technologies. And no real surprises there. Blockchain, the Internet of Things, 3D printing, and so on, artificial intelligence, drones. But what's interesting is that the way we got to those was not just because we thought those were the right ones. We actually had a computer algorithm, and we input into it a number of different factors based on public and private investment in those technologies, based on how widespread and impactful they're going to be across different industries, across how disruptive they're going to be globally, their availability. All of those factors were taken into account, and the algorithm spat out these 8 technologies. We tend to look at them in silos. We tend to think, what can virtual reality do? what can drones do? And I think Joanne was talking about this at the end of her presentation, about convergence. The convergence of technologies is where the true value lies. So when you consider what can virtual reality and artificial intelligence do? What can augmented reality and the Internet of Things do when they come together? This first example, virtual reality and drones. This is a real-life example from MIT. They're actually putting drones, making them think they're in a virtual reality environment to teach them how to fly without the danger of them crashing. So interesting, very creative scenarios being produced. That's it from me. I recognise that we haven't talked much about the risk side of things, but when it comes to the panel, you'll have all of us here. We can have a chat about it, a little bit of a brainstorm about what the potential negatives might be, what we should be worried about in the future when it comes to these technologies. And there are some things to worry about, it's true. And yeah, hopefully that will be interesting for you. Thank you for listening, everyone.
Thank you for your presentations. It was fascinating. Obviously, you sort of raised a lot of sort of opportunities where these new technologies would benefit mankind. But there is an alternative view, which is, to me, seems like a very dystopian future, where human beings are being replaced by automation, algorithms, by bots, by one or another technology that you mentioned here. How do you contrast the two in the sense of where do you see this? How do you see this playing out? Because ultimately, we are in control of our destiny right now, but this sort of future you were predicting was veering towards, a world which is controlled not by humans. In fact, if anything, humans seemed like bots there. Everything was working to mechanical precision in its own sort of realm.
Yeah. So, I think it comes down to fear of change at the end of the day. And this fear of automation is not at all new. And in fact, there was fear of automation in the last industrial revolution. I imagine once we get through this hump, the next revolution beyond that is going to create more fear. And ultimately, if you look at the past to try and understand what the future holds, that fear was mostly unfounded in the sense that we're still here. We don't, as far as I can see, live in a dystopian society. Maybe others have a different view. But ultimately, I think there is less to worry about than we think. I think a lot of the worry around the world is the fear of the unknown. It's being driven by that. So I'm very positive. Maybe that's because I'm just a very positive person when it comes to this.
Yeah, but the outcomes you're predicting, for example, X number of millions of jobs will be replaced by bots. There has to be an alternative that suggests what are these sort of people going to do. You're sort of predicting, you're looking into the future saying these technologies will be in prominence, but you're not able to really articulate what human beings themselves would be doing once those jobs are replaced by bots.
Yeah, I think one of the things that the beauty about this is that none of us know the future, and we can only put those sort of scenarios out there and trying to think about, well, if it does look like that, what are both the risks and opportunities to the business? Now that does feel a bit of dystopian future, and I think what we might end up with is something in between what we have now and that very sort of rise of the robots kind of feel, I think. But it is a really valid point, what will people be doing in the future? And I still think we'll be doing a lot, to be honest with you, even if it is carving things by human hand.
Thanks again for all the three talks. They were very interesting, and I follow all the three spaces passionately. I was surprised that Rob McGraw wasn't here, the head of PWC AI, and then he goes on a different tangent. interestingly, question to all three of you, because I feel all three technologies have, let's say, can disrupt us tomorrow. But there's a big part of whether the society or the public will actually allow. Now, I did some research on mixed reality and job interviews, and I wrote something about it. And a lot of feedback was like, if I have algorithms running in my, let's say, classes saying that you're lying or not, and that's going to remove all white lies, then what's the point of having a CEO? What's the point of having, investor calls because I can't lie? Similarly for drones, I feel like, like the whole Venezuela attack, I think it just pushed back like all the, let's say, forward buzz towards drone another 12 months back, because everyone's now going to be thinking, wait, can I be bombed by a drone? So, like, what's your thought on that? Like, what's the impact of society and like ethical implications of society coming into play?
Sure, yeah. Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, and we're very conscious of the public acceptance and taking the public on the journey with this, and that's why, from a drones point of view in the UK, which is where we're focused, this absolutely isn't going to happen overnight. I think what we need to do, we need a government that's going to kind of have an agenda for this, and where they want to be in 5 years' time, and what they want the public to be behind. There is investment in, for example, an initiative called the Flying High Challenge, whereby Innovate UK have released funding to cities, and they've passed it over to those cities themselves and said, how do you want drones to be used in your cities? Where's the value? What are you worried about? And they've given them investment to go and explore that, so that it's putting it back in the hands of the public is very important. I think having a regulatory environment, so drones are slightly different to the future that maybe these guys are talking about, because drones are here and now, and it's ultimately the government's responsibility to protect its citizens, keep people safe, protect people's privacy. So I think the government agenda is absolutely key here, and what the British government want out of that, and that's the pace of change at which we'll go. I think the positive stories, I think allowing drones to be used for good, to be used in our public services, I think that's the step number one, and supporting that with a regulatory environment.
Thanks. So on the mixed reality example you gave, I totally get it. I don't think anyone would appreciate being scrutinised that heavily through glasses, just a computer assessing you and then delivering that ultimatum or that conclusion on your personality or my personality or what I'm thinking or what I'm feeling directly via the machine. But although that is a possibility in the future, it doesn't mean we have to go in that direction. It is something that is within our control. We have the ability as human beings to form boards, to form bodies, organizations that assess all of these different scenarios, the uses of these technologies, what is acceptable, what is unacceptable, and I feel something like that would definitely come into heavy conversation during one of those meetings.
Yeah, we do a lot of research on social trends, as well as looking at future emerging technologies, and we're always looking at what very young people are into, because they're the generation who've grown up with iPhones, iPads, and I think it's quite interesting that now there's a little bit of a backlash on always being on the smartphone, always being on, if you like. So you do wonder, we are in control, and if we don't want something to happen, then I think we will either slow it down or it won't happen at all.
I'm old enough to have lived through one of the most disruptive technologies that we've seen so far in the history of the world, which is the development of the internet. I can remember the world before the internet, so it's nothing new. We've been dealing with disruptive technologies for centuries. But I just have one simple question for the members of the panel. How many of you have actually seen the original film Blade Runner, the 1982 version?
I have.
Yeah. I have, recently.
I haven't.
Oh!
Shame!
Yeah. I've heard a lot about it.
Yeah, just on that drones issue, would you say that the lack of a sort of coherent government direction at the moment and the negative publicity that drones are getting, so the vast majority of publicity out there at the moment as far as drones goes is not good. But the government doesn't seem to be standing up and saying, well, there are some bad guys out there that are using these things, but these are all the good things that they could be used for. You need to step up a bit, don't they? And it's not.
Yeah, I think you're right. There isn't a campaign behind UK drone use at the moment from the government. There are behind the scenes. There are different parties and different groups getting together. I think, for example, there's a BSI, so there's going to be a drone standard release. So I think the government are waiting for more robust governance to be in place at their end before they publicly get behind this campaign, which I think is cautious but probably quite sensible given, as you mentioned, the negative press and negative potential of drone use. So I think you might say they're slow off the mark and very, if you compare it to other countries, Switzerland using drone for deliveries, they're got a contract with their national post office. So there's no denying we're certainly not quite front running at the moment, but there's a lot going on behind the scenes with the effort.
Hi. Following the earlier question about Philip K. Dick's Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, Blade Runner, which of the other great prophetic science fiction authors are you looking to for guidance? Asimov, for the laws of robotics.
Asimov is not really in my realm totally, but have you ever read? I wouldn't call it a prophetic author. It's quite a new author actually, but Ready Player One, not the movie, the original book. So has anyone read the book? Has anyone watched the movie? No, only one.
Yeah,
okay,
couple.
a few. Okay. So Ready Player One is about a world where virtual reality has effectively taken over reality in terms of human time. So everyone is being educated in a virtual world, people are socializing in a virtual world, they're doing most things, being entertained in a virtual world. Everything that you would do in the real world, they're moving into a virtual environment, and the real world is being neglected as a result. It's an interesting storyline, and one that was picked up by Steven Spielberg for the film version of Ready Player One. But ultimately, such a dystopian view about where we go with technology is always appealing to humans, because we like to veer towards the dystopian, because that is, in a way, the most discussion arousing. It creates the most fear, which is very contagious as an emotion. Thinking about technology in an indifferent fashion, or something that will be just fine, is not particularly engaging or interesting from a media perspective or a thought perspective. So we always tend to veer towards the worst case scenario. And that's something I think we need to balance out with the positives, even though in some cases, as you mentioned, maybe we do go overboard in not considering enough of the negative. But I fear that is less of an issue in the world. I fear we move towards the negative too much. And so this doesn't really answer your question. It partly does. Ready Player One, on a tangent, I don't think dystopian scenarios are that much of they're too attractive, basically, to human beings.
Then I can recommend some good authors.
Hi. Going by everything that's been discussed, we all know that regulation and government will always be playing catch up with technology. And I do know that management consultants like yourself and Essential of this world would, follow your clients' instruction and goal and do whatever needs to be done to give them that competitive edge. Consider that we are, ISACA community, and we are talking about threats and vulnerabilities and security. As part of corporate social responsibility, when will we push that agenda so that people who are at the forefront of those technology deployment are actually thinking about ethics and driving that agenda at board meetings?
Okay, that one. John?
It's an ethics question.
It is.
It's when we're bringing. I guess from a drone's point of view, the misuse of drones is front and centre, basically, of most conversations we certainly have with clients. It's a big concern from our clients from a security and privacy point of view. We work with a lot of drone suppliers, a lot of drone tech startups, and it very much is on their agenda as well that they want their devices to be used to be used for good. I think drone technology, in terms of ethics, you can misuse a drone, but it's not going to be something that essentially kind of takes over the world, and so it's the conversation's more here and now about the human use of drones. And I think the government in particular is very concerned about this. Here at PWC we have ethical AI frameworks in place, we have responsible AI frameworks in place that we discuss with all of our clients when they're thinking about embedding these technologies within their business. So I think I would say it is front and centre of most conversations that we're having, the ethics of it.
Yeah, I would add to that. I mean, that whole virtual reality demonstration, you could have a full ethics debate on every one of those disruptors, I think. And one of the big ones that comes up is around data and giving away your data. You notice when everything was charging, you're giving away your data. When you're paying for things, you're giving away for your data. Everything you saw through those augmented reality glasses, you give away your data, and those adverts that you saw were all personalised to you. So it raises huge ethical questions, I think, in the future around data as well.
From a virtual reality perspective, arguably it's earlier in its life on the maturity curve than a technology like drones. But despite that, in our latest report that we wrote on the business and legal aspects of this technology, it's a publicly available document, we've started to discuss the potential issues around the technology. We've started to discuss concepts like the impersonation of high-level executives during virtual meetings, for example. We started to discuss the privacy aspects of VR technology in terms of what data you can collect, because obviously you can collect different forms of data currently as you browse the internet and as you choose what mediums to engage with. But when it comes to VR, it's not only that data that can be captured, but data around your height can be captured because it's being detected by the sensors there. Data around how you walk, your gait, can be detected and logged. Data around exactly what you're looking at can be logged. And not looking at as in I've clicked on that link and I've looked at that web page. Exactly what object you were looking at in the virtual world for how long. Down to that level of granularity can be logged and recorded potentially. So all of that we've started to discuss and bring to light, but it's not only PwC that's doing it. The VR/AR industry themselves are talking about multiple issues relating to the technology aspects as well as other ethical points around things like harassment within a virtual world. So I feel a lot of it is already being brought up, which is excellent.
And I guess one more comment on from a drones, that privacy is a big issue. But I think if you remember a few years ago when CCTV was becoming kind of ubiquitous in the UK, and there was quite a lot of outrage about that and privacy, and it was in the news a lot. But now no one even bats an eyelid that every time you walk down the street you're being filmed, and you probably don't know where that data's going or where it's being captured or stored. So I think there are some parallels, and again it just goes to people are scared of things that are here and now, but in 10 or 20 years time things are very different. So that's a parallel I use in terms of the drones world.
Thanks for sharing, by the way, that was really good. Without kind of focusing too much on the dystopian future or looking into 1984 very much, do we really think it will change?
George Orwell, yes.
Yeah. Do we really think it will change that fast? I mean, with the inception of all this new automation and AI, Internet of Things, etc., we already know that the constraints for 5G and the connectivity. with the massive automation brings more network and data. You know, would it really change that fast? Did you think? Because like I said, with the Internet of Things, we're already worried about 5G because it doesn't have the bandwidth to be able to accommodate IoT. So with the inception of all the other technologies as well, will we not be kind of hindered by those technologies?
So one of the things that our clients ask us to do is look for the signals that these technologies are coming ever closer. Because something that might look not within my lifetime suddenly gets a lot of investment. There are lots of startups working on it. We've validated the market. And it creeps ever closer, and it goes from, well, not in my lifetime to actually 20 years down to 10, and you've got to keep an eye on those signals. As I said right at the beginning, you don't want to be the next blockbuster, right? So it is difficult to tell. What we have developed an actually system that uses machine learning to try and spot those different signals, so we can tell that maybe something is a lot closer.
The speeds at which technologies get adopted are not necessarily challenged or bottlenecked by the technology development themselves, but are often bottlenecked by the cultural challenges associated with implementing that technology in the real world. So if you consider virtual reality, because it's my realm, there is very advanced technology currently available to introduce that now into enterprise, and a lot of companies have adopted it. Now, it hasn't become mainstream in the consumer world, although we're starting to see these being sold, consumer headsets being sold on the market by companies like Facebook and so on. The cultural elements are the big problem here. The virtual reality headsets are big, they are arguably unfashionable, they require a lot of processing power. I would put a lot of emphasis on the fact that they don't look good. If you consider what we care about nowadays in the world of technology, well, what can mainstream consumers do? In my opinion, they care a lot about the fashion of it. How does it look on me? Do I look like a techie if I'm wearing it? Or do I look chic? And that can be the big difference between the adoption of the technology and the rejection of it. So, in a way, what I'm saying is, I wouldn't be too worried about the advancement of technology. I'm more worried about the advancement of humanity's or society's views on the technology. Yeah, exactly.
I think we just have time for one more question.
So on the last comment by you about it's the culture that holds the implementation of technology. The culture differs globally, and if we look at the democratic process of Western countries, for example, UK, obviously we have to go to Parliament. We have to, if we want to put a proper governance in place, we have to go through parliamentary consultation. But if you look at, on the other hand, countries like China or Russia, for example, they don't have those kind of constraints. To give you an example, not recently, but they have implemented AI to detect people who jaywalk on the street and issue instant fine to their mobile phones. Now, consider that implementing that in UK, probably it should take years. And again, it comes down to public acceptance as well. There in China, culture like China and Russia, there's no kind of consideration for human rights to that level as in Western cultures. So my question is, again, based on these cultural differences, I think while we're waiting for our proper governance and ethics to come in place, I think we will certainly, do you think we will lag behind the countries like China and Russia, where the government has kind of free rein on these disruptive technologies?
Okay. So again, I'm speaking from a VR/AR perspective here. You make a very valid point. But in the VR/AR realm, I feel the bottleneck is not regulation and governance, but you may be interested to know that in East Asian countries, particularly China, there is a much greater adoption of virtual reality technology than there is in the UK, but I don't feel that's connected to government regulation. I feel it's more connected to the cultural aspects and the cultural differences between the two countries.
From a drones point of view, regulation, yes, I do think that will prevent the UK from being an absolute leader in the drones world, but we do have some of the most congested airspace in the world. We're a small island, so there's no way anyone here would rather sacrifice the security and the privacy of citizens to be a front runner in this technology. So I don't think it's an ethical, I don't think it's a judgment call, it's just the right thing to do. So when we meet with the regulator, for example, they categorically say until this technology is 100% proven, that isn't going to be allowed to operate in our skies, and we wouldn't really want it any other way. So it's like I said before, it's the convergence and the management of the technology, the regulation and the social acceptance together in one movement. They've got to go hand in hand, I think, to take us on that journey. But if it means the UK aren't absolutely leading in this, it's not necessarily a bad thing to make sure we're using drones in the right way and probably the most sustainable way so that you can get benefits in the long term.
I'd just like your vote of sympathy for the Venezuelan president, who's become the first head of government to suffer an attack from a bomb which was going to be delivered by drones. So he's making history already, and history is advancing all the time. So be careful when you're out there and you see some pigeons up above. One of them might not be a real pigeon, and it might be after you. Other things to do with drones, of course, that I've seen, and you probably have as well, are drones buzzing around in offices to check out people's levels of alertness, tiredness, the temperature in the room, and so on. And therefore, then bringing coffee or whatever to the affected workers. So I think we might well get to a time when we have an evening event like this and a drone comes in and advises us that there's something waiting outside for us. And in fact, I've got an extrasensory perception that that is happening right now. If you'd like more information from us about the future events and so on, there's some outside about the next event, but there are lots of other good things coming up. There's one thing I'd like to ask you about. As we know, the university terms have just started. As you're probably also aware, there are some 40 or so academic institutions in the London region, 22 universities and lots of others. And we're not running anything at any of those. I would really like to seek your help to address the people of the future, the ISACA members of the future. How can we reach those universities and deliver ISACA messages, inspiration, training, etc. to them? If you're connected with a university or college, please come and see me afterwards, because I'd like to seek your ideas about how we can reach all the future members of ISACA who we want to help so much. So thank you very much for that. Thank you very much for being part of this event. And now we've got something for you outside. Thank you.